Hi and welcome to episode 1 of Solar Punk UK. I'm Chris Gilpin.
And I'm Arnold Gilpin.
And we are talking today in our very maiden first premiere episode on how do you build a house from scratch. Now Arnold, why are you uniquely qualified to talk about this?
Well, I'm one of the last architects to be educated in the arts and crafts movement. And I've been interested in sustainable living from I went to university. And it's been my life's ambition to build a house that sustains life without much input.
So you have this idea of building this house, and you've got a really nice house in London, and you decide to sell the house in London, go out to rural Bedfordshire, and build a house from scratch.
Yeah, it wasn't quite as simple as that. We spent many years looking around for suitable sites. And sites that we could afford to build a decent house on. We were looked in Sussex for many years because I quite like Sussex, but there weren't very many building sites come up for sale, and those that did were far too expensive. We then went further north up to round King's Lynn, where land was really quite cheap, and we designed some houses up there. But in the end, the place in Bedfordshire came up. Well, it didn't come up, we made it come up, because we actually actively went out and looked for possible sites. And the one we're in now ticked all the boxes.
So I have an idea of building a house from scratch. I buy some land, I get an architect, and they just start building, and it's a really nice, straightforward, simple process, correct?
No. The first thing that you've got to do to be successful is find a proper site. Now, the way that we did that, I'm talking about myself and my wife Lindsay, was we produced a diagram, a little map of what the ideal site would look like. One would be, it was beside a river because water supply is important. It was near to a village. It meant that the main rooms of the house could face south. And there was good public transport to and from London. And the one thing we didn't achieve was it was near a Waitrose.
That is a massive shame, but 9 out of 10 is not too bad. So what's the process of doing it? Now, you are in a unique position because you are an architect, and a very, very good architect with a great reputation in London. So you know what you're doing. But for the average Joe, how would you go about doing this process of obviously you need to find the land and find where you want it, etc. But what's the process you have to go through? Because it was not easy for you and Lindsay, was it?
No, but it's, if you have done your diagram out of the ideal site, then you will run across them. You'll be driving down the road one day, or in the case of this one, I was walking past it one day and it wasn't up for sale. And it had all sorts of problems. It was in a floodplain. The person didn't know they wanted to sell it. The local council weren't terribly helpful. But those are problems all there to be overcome, and in a way, the more problems be overcome, the cheaper the site is. It took us about 9 months to argue that the site wasn't in the floodplain. It was just an aberration of the guy who drew the line on the map. he had a choice because the contour line disappeared and there was something written on it. And he went round the back of the writing rather than through the middle of the writing. And that was where our house was. So we had to argue to get the flood map redrawn correctly. And once we were out of the floodplain, then we could start the planning process. And that took ages, and we had to go and address the planning committee to convince them why we wanted the design of house we did, because they wanted one that was symmetrical. When you were coming down the road, they wanted a door in the front and a window either side, whereas this house is asymmetrical because coming down the road you only see one half of it. But also nobody really understood the concept of having a house that wouldn't require any energy, and they were worried about the roof being composed totally of solar panels. But those are problems to be overcome, and we did in the end.
So, do you think that you could have done this if you weren't an architect? If you were, say, I don't know, a teacher? Do you think you could have done this process?
Oh yes. I have met lots of people who have no architectural qualifications whatsoever. One of the nice guys I met was a guy in Kent who had no money and built himself a beautiful house, log cabin, which he went to Finland to get. And it was on the first series of Grand Designs. He did it. He had a good architect who helped him through the process. And I would have thought that's fairly fundamental to the process, that you get an architect who understands the systems and the processes. But even having said that, we have a dysfunctional planning system in this country that just doesn't work. It doesn't work at any level. And you have to overcome that. And sometimes, no matter how much you try, you can't beat the system because it's gone wrong.
So if you had a magic wand and you could change 3 things about the planning system, and only 3, but you would completely change them overnight, what would you change to help people build houses on a plot of land? Because a lot of the development, I would assume, is from big companies and Taylor Wimpey and those kind of companies where they build loads and loads of houses. Obviously, we're in a unique position where you built one house and you had a plot of land for one house, you built one house, and that's it. So what 3 things would you change about the planning law or the process or the people? What 3 things would you change?
I don't think there's need to be 3 things changed. I would go for 1, is a presumption in favour of development for self-built houses. That you work from the basis that you will get planning permission unless there is a very, very good reason why the local authority thinks you shouldn't. And there would be a list of things that they could use, in that you're taking light away from your neighbours and so on. But it would be up to the local authority to say why they shouldn't give you permission, rather than the other way around. The thing to remember is that self-built houses are much, much, much better quality than estate-built developer houses. People who build their own houses care deeply, and they're houses that generally have a little bit more money spent on them in the good things, the things that will make them last and make them adaptable to future generations.
Interesting. So It seems like it would be an easy problem to solve because it's kind of like the legal system, innocent until proven guilty. You know, develop unless proven that it's really bad for the local area or the wider thing.
Yes, well, one's got to remember that the planning system was set up in the first place as a con. It was set up after the war by a Labour government that was desperate to nationalise land, but it hadn't the guts to actually do that. There was one problem at the time, was ribbon development, where all development was going up the main roads, which wasn't good planning. But what they did was brought in land nationalisation and tagged on ribbon development onto it. So we've been conned since around 1948 by a planning system. We just need to sit down now and actually decide what we want from a planning system. And it seems to be that the planning system is run by large developers, house builders, and a dysfunctional planning system, because it's the same amount of work to give planning permission to 1,000 houses as it is to give planning permission to one house. The bureaucracy is virtually the same. So if you're a local authority, a local planning authority, why wouldn't you give permission to 1,000 houses instead of one? It's more economical.
Yeah, it kind of makes sense in a way, but it doesn't feel it's right, does it?
No, not at all.
So, right, we've got this area of land, we've picked it, we've got a great architect, and something that I would not have thought about is the utilities. Talk to me about the utilities.
Utilities mean electricity, gas, broadband, and so on.
Yeah, because if you buy a house, those stuff is already, even if you need to knock the house down and rebuild it, that stuff is already there. But of course, if you buy a piece of land, there is no stuff there.
Utilities, at the end of the day, are not a problem. In the short term, they're a pain in the rear end. The number of houses that I built in my time, where they spent the first 9 months a year connected up to the water main by a garden hose, because nobody had gone round to do the final connection. I would advise anybody now, and it's what we do, is we get the services put in at the first moment we possibly can. Now, they won't put them in because if there's no building there, they're not going to connect it. What we did was actually built a couple of great big brick pillars, and we got all the services brought into there. And one of the brick pillars was called the gatehouse. Everybody was quite happy to connect up to a gatehouse, and then we could take the services from the brick pillar and into the house when it was a time to suit us. They didn't hold anything up. The only trouble is you end up with 2 addresses. You end up with a gatehouse care of whatever your house name is. So you get 2 television licensed men coming round wondering why you haven't got a television license for a brick pillar.
That sounds like a nightmare. So we've sorted out utilities, we've sorted out building the house. How do you keep the neighbours on side? Because if I would imagine that most plots of land that are desirable to build on are near residential roads, are near other people. So what do you, as an architect, putting your architect hat on, what do you do to make sure that the house is received nicely and received as well as it can be? Obviously, you will always get neighbours that complain, but for the majority, how do you design the house so that it's embraced by the local community rather than seen as an eyesore or otherwise?
As a practice, and when I was in business, we had a policy of always involving the neighbours in the process from the very beginning. It's 50-50 chance whether that's a good policy or not, because most people are very nice. They like to be consulted. They like to be involved in it, and it gives a happy outcome because you take on board their concerns before it goes to planning. When it doesn't work, the neighbours don't engage with you because they don't want any development there. They are the type of people who go and glue themselves to roads where you can't actually have a reasoned argument with them. And they will object to whatever you do and however you do it, and it's just a waste of time. How you overcome that is they will generally have the ear of the local planning authority or the local council, because there's no votes to be gained from giving you planning permission and losing 10 votes from your neighbours. The way you deal with that is to do a planning appeal, and I have found up until just recently the planning appeal service in this country to be about as good as it gets. You get a man or a woman who comes from outside the area, and they view the proposal and an objective viewpoint. They're not swayed. There's no votes in it for them. They get paid whether they turn it down or approve it. But you come away from the process, even if they've turned it down, thinking, well, if I was in that person's place, I might well have reached that conclusion. And you don't get better justice than that.
But for you to say that is quite a glowing endorsement of a piece of bureaucracy. You're not known for enjoying bureaucracy in that sense. So it must be very, very good system.
It's a good system because it's actually simple. You put forward your point of view. The local authority and the residents put forward their points of view in a very controlled manner. And then some poor soul has the job of getting a train from Swindon or somewhere up to Bedfordshire. And on the way up in the train, he reads the notes, visits the site, and then on the way back to Swindon, writes up the case on the train. So it's simple and it's good. And you get a decision within about 2 weeks from the site visit, or you used to. Now it takes about 2 years because of the delays caused by the pandemic. But a good system, one well thought out.
Ah, excellent. Okay, so we've got the utilities in, we've got the building planned, and the local area are on board with it. How long from buying the plot of land and starting the process do we actually have a house that we can live in? Obviously, it's how long's a piece of string, but how long would someone? Because when you buy a house, you're looking at 6 months from finding the house you like to actually being able to live in it, depending on the ladder, obviously. But you could do it in about 6 months, couldn't you? You could buy a house and live in it. Probably maybe 6 to 12 months. What's the kind of timescale for building a house from scratch on a plot of land that doesn't have anything on it, so you're not having to remove stuff? What do you reckon? Difficult to question.
Well, it's an impossible question to answer. The shortest time from you finding a site to moving in would probably be 18 months, 2 years. And that can stretch out to one I'm doing at the moment where we still haven't got planning permission, and that was started in 2016.
That was my next question, is what holds this up? Is it the planning permission? Is it what kinds of things can really add time to
what
this?
holds it up is the things that are not in your control by and large, and it's the planning system. You're dealing with a completely dysfunctional planning system, a local authority planning system, where um, you get turned down for the most spurious of reasons, and nothing is backed up. I mean, one of the things you'll get turned down is out of character with the area. Well, nobody's ever actually looked at the character of the area, and if they do look at the character of the area, they make sure the character of the area doesn't fit your house. So
It sounds very subjective.
Oh, totally,
Yeah.
totally. I mean, the planning is a corrupt system, and I don't mean financially
That's
corrupt.
corrupt with a little c. Yeah.
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 It's a system that's corrupt, not financially corrupt or people with envelopes or whatever. It's just a bad system that some people are trying to make work, and it's not.
It's difficult because everyone has their own ends, their own things they want from it that are not necessarily in house building, which is odd because at the moment the government are really pushing house building, aren't they?
Yes, but they're pushing large building companies.
For what you said earlier, it's one process with
Yes.
loads of houses, or one process with one little house.
1,000 houses, you can afford to employ a school of planning barristers. Whereas if you're doing it yourself, you're probably relying on an architect and maybe a planning consultant, but you wouldn't be able to afford a planning barrister. That would be unusual.
So we are sitting in the house you built from scratch right now.
Yeah.
Would you have put all this money into just buying a normal house and adapting it? Do you have any regrets? Do you think, oh, why did I do this? Like, how happy are you that you've gone through the process?
Oh, I'm very happy. Are there problems? Yeah, of course there are. Are there things you do better? Yeah, of course there are. I mean, this house is a prototype. Nothing like this has been done before. It was built like that. The costings of it were that we chose a builder. We didn't go out to tender. We chose a builder, and we got him to price up what this house would be if he was building it on a normal house on a normal site. So that was our baseline, and we decided to spend 10% extra on making the house sustainable, make it so that we employed local workmen as far as possible. We used local materials as far as possible, and we got it built as quickly as possible. The site was very difficult because we're on sand, and building a house on sand is not a terribly brilliant thing, especially if you're on the edge of a floodplain, because you get a flood of rain and the water runs down, washes all the sand out from underneath the foundations, and you're left with a house with nothing supporting it. So we, on this one, decided to pile the foundation, which is basically boring holes down into the ground and filling them with concrete. So this house sits on 49 foot deep pillars buried into the sand. That's a decision that not everybody's prepared to take because it's an expensive business, but it means you have a house that's solid, and it was done by a local company.
Is that one of the benefits as well, is by building it yourself you can make those decisions, yet one of the bigger companies probably wouldn't,
Yes.
It will
Yes.
be an issue in 10 years, so
Yes.
why would they bother doing it?
Yes, there's a house built recently next door to me where they didn't make that decision. They put standard foundations in. And at some point, if there's a flood here, which there's likely to be in the next 50 years, the foundations stand the chance of being washed away from underneath it.
So one of the other preparations you did for a flood here is by having the living area, like the kitchen, the living
Yes.
room on the first floor,
Yes.
and then having no carpet.
Well, it's,
the ground floor.
it's one of those things. To build an economical house, you need everything in the house to do 2 or 3 separate things. This site, there is a beautiful view from the first floor. Because it's beside a river, you can look out across open farmland from the first floor. And there's also the risk of, because we're at the bottom of a hill and what probably was at one time an old water course, there is a real risk that there'll be a flood that comes running down the hill, and it'll go through the front door of the house and out the back door of the house. So moving the living accommodation to the first floor solved both problems.
But it's a weird one because we're sitting on the first floor now, and you get an amazing view from the kitchen, living room, of the river, of the bridge, of everything.
So it's a win-win.
You wouldn't want it any other way, would you?
No,
You wouldn't get the same
it's
view.
It's a win-win. But it's the thing in building houses. You want everything you put into a house to have more than one function. Well, you can see behind me now the large windows. Those windows form 2 functions. You've got a lovely view, you've got a really nice outlook, but actually there's more energy comes through those windows. So they're massive solar collectors because the house, the rear faces south. So you can feel it on your back at the minute how much energy is coming through the windows. So the windows produce two win-wins. You get a nice view and you get lots of energy coming through them. That energy, the floor, not only holds you up, but the energy coming through the window falls on a tiled floor and gets soaked up into the concrete floor, and it's stored in the concrete floor. If it gets too hot, the heating system comes on without the heat and takes the excess heat out of the first floor and puts it down into the ground floor, so that in the evening that heat circulates back up through the house again.
Now we're giving away a sneak peek of episode 2 of this podcast, which will be about the biggest coup of this house is its eco credentials, and it's built as a very, very sustainable house.
Yes.
And we're going to be talking about that in episode 2. So if you have enjoyed this podcast, which you can find us on any podcast provider, probably, hopefully. You can also find us on YouTube. So just search for the way you found this one, and hopefully there's more episodes than just one. And please click like and subscribe to the podcast, and subscribe to us on YouTube for more interesting stuff. Is there a final message about how happy you are with this house and how happy you are having gone through the process? We've kind of covered that earlier, but you said you were very happy. Few things you would do differently, but
what's not to be happy about? You can live in a house that pays you money. The disappointment was this house, we did all the calculations ourselves, but it was designed to give us free energy and pay the council tax bill. Well, it didn't quite pay the council tax bill because it's gone up faster than anything else.
Okay, thank you very much, and we'll see you hopefully in episode 2. Thank you very much.
Thank you.